Hi guys, BGD here, and welcome to my first ever tutorial video. Please hold the applause. Anyway, this video is going to be me painting the Chainrasp halls from my favourite army in Age of Sigmar, which is the Nighthaunt. The unit I'm going to be painting today are the Chainrasp hordes, because they're quite easy, and with these miniatures you can actually have quite a few on the board, so I think it's something like 40 per unit. So I've done one already just to have a test, see if I like the colours, and it seems to be alright actually. It seems to be quite a ghostly look to it, which is quite interesting because they are ghosts. So we're going to be doing this with all of them other than the leader, who is holding a staff with the candles on. We're going to do him a slightly different colour, so purely because I'm a bit strange like that and I prefer to have an odd one out. So during this tutorial I'm going to be explaining everything about the base coats, the dry brushing, shading, all things like that. I don't like to stick to traditional colours, so I'm going to be using my own, as you can see from this miniature. And I'm going to get a move on now. So here we go. So with all of these miniatures, the Chainrasp hordes, I've base coated them, or primed them, sorry, with a Corax white spray, which I got from the Warhammer shop. Now, the only reason I do this is because it does help out with the shading that I'm going to be putting on, about keeping it quite light and not too dark. So the first base colour I'm going to be using is the Balthazar Gold. This is going to be just for all of the metal parts on the miniatures, so such as the axes, swords, different things like that. So I'm going to use a wet palette, so just add a small amount into the palette. Add some water, you see, trying to dilute it a little bit. This just makes it easier when painting on. It gives her a much smoother finish if you do it in multiple layers when it's diluted. You don't want to dilute it too much, or it will take, one, a while to dry, and two, it can just potentially rub off of the model as you're going along. So you want to make sure it's like an in-between, and it gives you some nice coverage. Sometimes you will need to go over it a couple of times, other times you might not. You might think it looks pretty well as is. So I'm going to start off doing this. It just helps get the brush into a nice point while it's wet. Gets a nice bit of, be able to paint a bit easier then when it's at a point instead of having it all frayed. So we're going to start off by painting the chain. Excuse my camera for not being in focus, it is only a phone. So while it's diluted, it does tend to go or flow into all of the crevices. So it just makes it that bit easier then, instead of having to use the paint itself without being diluted, getting it into those tiny gaps. So I'm going to use this. Paint over the wrist chains. Now you haven't got to be too careful with this part, because you can go over with the Corax white again, like just on the gaps if you miss, or go over on what you've already sprayed. So the chain's done, not that you can see it with the camera. I'm now going to be doing the ball at the end of the mace. So there we go, gained a bit of focus. So right, so now all of the Balthazar gold is done on this miniature. Right, just doing some final touches, just go over a second coat. It's looking okay at the moment. So like, I've gone over a few places, but I will be later on going over with the Corax white just to fill in like the white that I've ruined. I've absolutely annihilated it. So if you can see, obviously I'm not very good with my camera angle, so I'll just shuffle that there. Just making sure that it's completely covered, got a nice coat. There, so when I can get the camera to focus. Yeah, that is this miniature done. So with the, well, I say done, it can be if you really want it to be, but all the metal parts are done. Obviously they look a bit bronzy at the moment, so we'll be going over them with a dry brush later on. Time for a time lapse with some completely irrelevant music. Right, so that is all of the Balthazar gold done on all of the metal parts of each miniature. So I didn't want to have the camera on the whole time because it would have just taken absolutely ages. And no one's got time to be sitting there and watching someone paint the same thing over and over and over. So make sure I've got my clean brush. Dry it out. A quick sip. That'll do. Now for the handles of each of the miniatures. So I'm not going to be painting them with the Balthazar gold. I'm actually going to be painting these with the Mournfang brown. So with the miniatures that have swords, I've done the handles with the gold because obviously they're going to be metal handles. But for all of the axes, maces, things like that, I'm going to be using the Mournfang brown. I always forgot what it was then. So again, I am going to be using a wet palette. So most of my base paints I will be using a wet palette, as you'll see. So, and because there's not many handles or wooden areas on these miniatures, I'm just going to be using a small amount. Making sure I'm getting enough ore in there. Again, I cannot stress enough, you don't want to thin it down too much. Okay. So, might need a tiny bit more. Perfect. So, with this one, the leader, I'm not going to be painting anything on him with the brown because I'm going to make his staff gold and his helmet gold, just to make him stand out that bit more. So just so everybody knows he's the leader, if the staff isn't enough. So I'm going to swap him out for this little guy. I'm going to be starting, as I said, just on the handles here. So with this part, you've got to make sure you are being a bit more careful around the gold areas, because otherwise you're just going to be back and forward, having to retouch up the gold, retouch up the brown, so on and so forth. So I'm going to start at the very edge near the gold and work my way away from it. So all the way down. Now you want to make sure you cover all areas, because you don't want to be going back and forward trying to find like areas that you missed, or you might even, when you put it on the table to play, that you've missed a bit and it just looks so weird. So we're going to be moving around, making sure we're getting all the underside, everything like that. Might need another couple of coats on this. So they do look very similar to the gold areas, but when you see it in person it does look different. Making sure you're getting all of the detailed parts. This one's basically done now, so I'm just doing a little more touch-ups, and I'm going to skip forward to the others being done. Alright, so now all of them have been painted with the brown. Make sure my brush is clean. Put the brown away. So many times I've nearly gone to clean my brush in my beer, by the way, and honestly a couple of times I have actually done it. Yeah. So next I'm going to be using the wraith bone, and that's just going to be on all of the fleshy areas or the bone areas. It will look quite similar to the Corax white, but I'll try to hold it close to the camera so you can see that there is a bit of a difference. It's more like an off-white than Corax white itself. Same as usual, I'm going to be using a wet palette. Again, don't need much because there's not much fleshy areas. Add a bit of water. Looks okay. So, let's start with his hand. Very carefully trying not to hit any of the gold areas. So you can see I'm starting at the gold and working my way away from it. So both sides. Again, I have forgotten to do one side before and it just looks off. It doesn't matter so much if you go over the Corax white with this, because you can cover that up with painting it later on. Plus we're going to be using quite a dark colour on the capes, so that'll cover it up quite easily. Making sure the skull's done as well, because you can see his face. Now, if the camera focuses, you can see that it is slightly off-white, so you can tell the difference with this. Right, now all of these have been done, I'm going to close up the wraith bone, and I'm going to grab the Althuan Grey. Now, with this, I'm just going to be going over all of these stone areas. So, a couple of them have tombstones on or rocks at the bottom. Sorry, I had to have a drink then. So, I'm going to be covering with the Althuan Grey. Make sure you've shaken all your paints before using them. So, with this one, again, same as always, I'm going to be using a wet palette. So yeah, as you can see, some stony areas on these. And others have tombstones. I'm just going to go around them. It will come out quite light at first, but I will be going over it with some Nuln oil later on, just to make it a bit darker and dull looking. Again, going to be using wet palette. Not going to need much of this one either, because only a few of them have stony areas on. So make sure we've got a small amount at the ready. Just sticking it up a little bit, I made it a bit too watery. That's fine. So again, you might not notice it first, but I'm just going to go over all of these stony areas. The Althuan Grey. Make sure you're getting both sides. Trying your best not to get over any of the other painted parts. And that is all it needs doing. So I've done all of the others now. I'm just going to have a drink again. Yeah. Now you might see me top up my drink, but that's just because I like to have a drink when I'm painting. So all of the greys are done. I'm now going to be coating all of them with the... Oh, you can't focus. There we go. The Nighthaunt oxide. I can't pronounce that. So just give it a good shake, because this one does separate quite quickly. Make sure you completely shake it. Now, with this one, we are going to be literally covering all of it. So weapons included, everything that you've already painted. So we're just going to get a slightly bigger brush. Make sure it's big enough, obviously, to make it a bit more of a quicker process. So let's find that. Wait a bit, because it was too dry. Right. Making sure that it hasn't got any paint on it. Right. So here we go. We are literally going to be coating all of it. No, weapon included, everything. So this should fill the recesses, so it gives sort of shading in areas as well. So it might be a technical paint, but it can still be used the same way. So just coat this completely. Right, so this one's done. Have to get the camera to focus. There you go. It does dry different, so it'll look a bit more ghostly, like a spirit. But right now it's time for another time lapse with some absolutely irrelevant music. Right, now I'm done using the lilac oxide. Just give my brush a clean. We're going to be moving on to another shade now for all of them. I'm going to be using the Nighthaunt Gloom, and that is just going to be for all of the cape areas on the Chainrasp Horde, other than the leader again. We're going to make his a slightly darker colour than the others. So if I grab one of them. Wait for my camera to focus again. There you go. So we are just going to be doing all of the cape areas. You can see that the lilac oxide has dried quite nicely. So, see that? So just around the top. There we're going to go. All of them. So we're going to try and avoid the areas that are pretty much under the cape, so part of the ghost itself. So I'm going to take this bit nice and easy. Start the front. As you can see, I am starting at the bottom and working my way up. That just helps me pretty much keep away from the main areas that I'd like to keep the lighter colour. Sorry, just realised I was out of camera view where I was trying to focus too hard. So, and as you can see, it is a considerably darker colour than the lilac oxide. So, and these, wait for it to focus again. So, this is how it looks so far. So it's looking quite nice. We are going to make the cape slightly darker again a bit later on. So, now I've skipped ahead. I've done the leader using a different shade, so I've actually used the Hexwraith Flame. So just grab that. There you go. So the Hexwraith Flame, which is another technical paint. So and it's come out quite nicely. It's might not be able to see the difference when they're apart, but this one is clearly more of a greeny colour, whereas the others are a bit more blue. So I've even done the flame as a Hexwraith Flame. So now all I'm going to do is I'm going to be painting the staff with a gold, and the helmet as well, of course, just so it makes them stand out that little bit more. So the gold I'm going to be using is the Retributor armor. As you can see, my pot's a bit messy, so I've used that in the past quite a lot. So we're going to stick to oh, just painted the lid there. So stick to tradition, use a wet palette. So again, I've probably used too much there, but we don't need much of this because it is just going to be a very small amount. Dilute that a little bit. A bit of excess water on the brush there. That seems okay. But just quickly dry my brush off a little bit. Not too much water on it. There you go. Get it into a nice point again. Gives you a bit more accuracy when painting. So get a very small amount on the brush. Yeah, I will need to be very careful on this part just to avoid any of the other painted areas. So again, start where I've already painted and work my way down and away from it. And stuff is done. I'm just going to work on the helmet now. Again, making sure to be very careful not to go over all the beautifully painted areas. Make sure that's completely covered. I do move the miniatures around quite a bit just to try and get better angles. Sometimes it is a bit awkward in awkward positions, especially when they're glued and assembled prior to painting. So go around checking, making sure it's all completely covered. Got a nice coat over it all. Okay. Don't know if you can see it, but that has come out quite a nice gold colour. Okay. Again, we will be darkening that down a bit later on, just so it doesn't look too new compared to being a ghost. Try brush off again. To a point. Yeah. Put the Retributor armour away. now I'm going to be moving on to a bit of dry brushing. Make sure my brush is clean before I put it away. Got me a large dry brush from Army Painter. These I find are really good brushes to use. I've used really cheap ones before and they just make them look a mess half the time. So sometimes splashing out on a bit more expensive brushes can make it all worth it. So the paint we're going to be using to dry brush is actually a layer paint, but it's the Ulthuan Grey again. So give that a good shake. Although you might not get as much coverage with a layer paint using it as a dry paint, it does still give that same effect. So you just might need to top up your brush a bit more. So make sure your brush is completely dry. Get a small amount on. And you're pretty much just going to wipe as much as you can off. So you don't want to layer it on too much, because otherwise it'll just look a bit weird. So you're going to start very lightly and very quickly, brushing over the cape areas. Like that. So that just catches the edges. Making sure you're dry brushing over where all the creases are. Now with the actual spirit itself, you want to work in a sort of diagonal line down, so the white collects a lot more at the bottom, which will give it a sort of faded effect. So obviously you'll start at the top, brush down, and as you go just start your brush off slightly lower down so you get more on the ends. When you're dry brushing these, you want to try and avoid all of the metal areas. As you can see, it's caught the lines quite nicely. So let's go a little bit more on the ends, just to get them that bit lighter. Making sure you get all areas. So all of them have now been dry brushed with the Ulthuan Grey. I'm now going to move on to, well, I'm going to start by with the leader doing the dry brushing. So I'm going to be using the Necron compound. When you can see it, there you go, Necron compound. So, and this gives a nice metallic effect, so we're going to be using this on all of the weapons for each of the Chainrasp Horde. So, again, small amount on the dry brush, like most of it off. So I'm not sure you can see, but I'm pretty much going until you get hardly anything off of the brush. And again, very lightly, quick motions, just across where the metal areas are. Even adding a small amount onto the staff itself, just to give it that bit more of a shine. So, again, you want to be careful not to go over any of the ghosty areas. Over the helmet. So giving it that nice shine. I think, that is all you need to do. So as you can see, it's giving it a slight shine to it, all the metal areas. Do a little bit more on the helmet. All done. Oh, forgot to do the keys. All the others don't have as much metallic items on them, so they're going to be a lot easier to do. There you go. So they've all been done with the Necron compound now. So they're all looking pretty nice. I'm now going to go over and do another layer on the capes of them, making them that little bit darker. So for the miniatures that aren't the leader, I'm going to be using the Drakenhof Nightshade. So, and that's just a dark blue shade which gives it a nice effect. The highlights will show through, highlighting that you've already done. It's when I get the lid to stay open. It's going to be one of those days. There you go. So, just going to get a little amount on the brush. And again, I'm going to start work away from the lighter colours. A little bit more. There you go. As you can see, the highlights on the creases are still showing through, so you ain't got to worry about any of that being messed up or if you do find some of the highlights are a bit dull for your liking, you can just go over them again. That's not a problem. But you will need to wait for this to completely dry, which might take a bit longer than the base paints, but it is still relatively quick. Making sure I've got all of the detail in. So it does give a nice shade to it as well, like shadows in the areas that need to be. Yeah. As you can see by the colour difference, if I can get it to focus, yeah, it's darkened down quite a bit. So just working my way through all of the others now. Going through using the Drakenhof. Again, making sure to be extra careful. Try not to go over any of the painted areas. It's looking pretty good. That's all of them done now, other than the leader, but I'm going to be doing him with a slightly darker shade. So to make his cape that bit darker than all the others. Put that one away. I'm going to be moving on to the Nuln oil, which seems to be quite popular. On there. There you go. And I'm also going to be doing the flame with the Cassandra yellow. So you'll be able to see the difference with that. It does make it look quite good, like a ghostly flame. Make sure my brush is clean, got a point to it. Give it a good shake. Have a break. And here we go. Might not notice a difference as I'm shading this one, but it will come across quite dark. I need a bit more on that one. There you go. As you can see, it's filling all of the deeper areas to give a nice shade look. I'm even going to be going over the metal parts or the gold parts with this, just to give them that bit more of a dull look. Making sure all of that's covered nicely. And the arms, and like I said, over the metal areas as well. So they can go over the helmet. Again, the highlights will still show through, so you will be able to see that bit of shine to it. And along the staff. And this is basically done now. So I'm going to put the non-oil away. Need to brush it clean again, because we're going to be using it for the flames next. Right off into a point. And we're going to now move on to the Cassandora yellow. So, try to keep that open again. No, I'll prop it open instead. And I am literally just going to go over just the flame areas. Try and prop that open. And we're going back to it. There you go. So yeah, just the flame areas. You might not be able to notice the difference yet, but I'll move it closer to the camera so you can see that there is quite a big difference. Make sure to go over all of the flame. So it won't make it completely yellow, but it will just give a slight yellow tint. It makes it look that bit more like a fire. So I think that's done, as you can see. Yeah, it's got a nice yellow to it, just to make it that bit more ghostly fire that we're going for. So there you go, front and back. Looking good. So now we're done using that Cassandora yellow. Put that one away. Make sure the brush is nice and clean. So, as you can see with the colour difference now, if I put them together, you'll be able to see that the troops, I suppose, are blue and the leader's more of a green colour. So it just makes them stand out that little bit more. So just give them a nice, different, ghostly effect to it. So if you want to do them all the same colour, you can do. That's completely down to personal preference. But I like to always make the leader a bit different. So I'm now going to be moving on to basing my miniatures. I'm going to be using a small dry brush for this. just because I find it a bit easier. You can use like a spatula or things like that. But I'm going to be basing with the Armageddon Dust. And when that's down, it will look quite light. So I will be darkening it down a bit with some Nuln Oil. And then when that's completely dried, I'm just going to be highlighting it with just like a grey. So with this, you can lay it on as thick as you want. Obviously, the thicker you go, the longer it'll take to dry. But if you ever see, I'm literally just going to slap it on. Make sure to cover the entire bottom. Once this is all done, like I said, I'm going to Nuln Oil over the top of it and dry brush it a bit, just to highlight the higher areas. And then I'm going to paint around the rim with the Abaddon Black. So that'll look quite nice when it's finished. As I said, just slap it on all the way around. Making sure not to get on any of the painted areas already. Get that completely covered. You don't want to see any white areas through it. So if you're going to base them, you don't have to, you can just paint the bases black again. Again, it is all down to personal preference. Just go all the way around the edges. And that is the Chainrasp folds complete. So I really enjoyed painting these, and I always do, because they are very simple to paint. You can make them as technical or as simple as you want. So as you can see, they are all based. I've got the highlights on there. Got the 1 litre at the front standing out. So my next project is actually going to be a slightly bigger one. So it's going to be the leader of the death group, and it is going to be the leader Nagash. So it's going to be a bit more difficult to paint, so with a lot more detail as well, so it's going to be a lot harder. So, but I think I'm going to really enjoy this one as well. So thank you all for watching. I really appreciate it. I hope you've learned quite a bit about painting Nighthaunts. As you can see, I'm not exactly a professional, but they've turned out pretty good. So as for me painting the larger model Nagash, if you leave a comment below, like any colour scheme details, anything like that, I'll be sure to keep it in mind. So don't forget to subscribe to my channel if you want to keep updated on all of these, and cheers, thank you again for watching.